if you believe at this point that the Republicans are in favor of more personal liberties, freedom, I mean, seriously, it's time to wake up and take a look at the country. Take a look at these two examples. In Idaho, Republicans have created effectively a new sort of law, unprecedented, that outlaws what you do in other states where they are not in charge. They don't have jurisdiction. So effectively what they're doing here is trying to stop residents from traveling outside of the state to get an abortion. This is Idaho right now, but they're working on it in multiple states, so you might want to take a look at your own. It would create a whole new crime dubbed, quote, abortion trafficking, which is defined in the bill as an adult who, with the intent to conceal an abortion from the parents or guardian of a pregnant, unemancipated minor, either procures an abortion or obtains an abortion-inducing drug for the minor. It makes it illegal inside of the state, but importantly, the language is intentionally vague enough that it will allow prosecution for people who get the actual abortion or the medication outside of the state. It would be a felony. People found guilty under it would spend 2 to 5 years in prison. And also, local prosecutors, again, they're all for like, federalism and freedom, and like you get to decide. You have to enforce this. Your authority is superseded. So take a look at what they're doing here. They're stopping, you from doing this inside of their state, but also outside of the state. But what is happening inside of the state? You're not getting the abortion inside the state. You're not getting the medication. So what did you do within their jurisdiction? You had an intent. You had a thought of what you were going to do outside of the state. This is a literal thought crime. You are going to be prosecuted for something that within their domain was an intent. It was a thing you were planning to do, nothing that you actually did. And they're comfortable with this. The group that's telling you about, black helicopters and one world government and totalitarianism are outlawing intent to do something somewhere else. See how comfortable people are with that. And it's not just that. When it comes to rights, take a look at this. In Arizona, they're passing a bill that is going to force students to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. HB 2523, introduced last month, seeks to require that the state's public primary and secondary schools, quote, set aside a specific time each day for students who wish to recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the US flag, adding that, quote, each student shall recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States at this time. Bill, you only can refuse once you're 18 or if you have specific parental permission, which in some of these red areas is gonna be a really fun conversation with your Fox News watching parents. That's the entire point of this. It's not an actual possibility for many students. And they defend this. Senator Wendy Rogers in Arizona saying, this is to make sure that students growing up understand the country in which they live and embrace the citizenship and the founding principles that we hold so dear, or at least pretend to. Principles like freedom, your freedom, which we're stripping away to make you read our propaganda. That's all this is. You can't be taught about slavery or systemic, racism. That would be propaganda. But us making you literally read a creed that you don't believe, they think that that should be not up to you. And by the way, they don't care that this is explicitly unconstitutional. I don't mean that like you can interpret that this might be found to be unconstitutional. No, very specifically in West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, the court ruled that the state cannot compel anyone, including school children, to profess or vow a belief they do not hold. Justice Robert Jackson said, compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard. You cannot force someone to do this. They know that. Again, they do not care what the law says. They are doing propaganda because their base wants them to do it. So all of your rights, whether it's to what you do in a different place with a different legal system, or what you are forced to claim to believe, you do not have anymore. Here, what do you think?
Criminalizing dissent at this point. So we start with the kids in school, and also let's think about the indoctrination of this in the first place. We're talking about the pledge here, and the line that Wendy Rogers said. They need to understand the country in which they live, the country in which they live, and the founding principles therein. What have they learned about the country they live in and the founding principles? Some of those founding principles were to enslave people and keep them as property. That was some of the founding principles before some things changed. Was that something that we should be learning about? Because I feel like we don't learn about it. In fact, some of those founding fathers that we praise so much, yes, they also held slaves. Many of them did. After we fought that Civil War, And people that generally still to this day wave around that Confederate flag, that non-American flag, since we're talking about Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, and you promote their BS, how much of it, how much of the loyalty are we gonna require from them? Because they're still holding on to that age-old founding fathers principle of enslaving people. That was the group of people who wanted to continue enslaving people, and they still support them on that. Oh, and by the way, that Pledge of Allegiance was getting promoted and pushed harder and harder because there was such division after that said Civil War about enslaving people. They wanted to bring some kind of unity to the country, so they were forcing people to recite this Pledge of Allegiance to try and have everyone coalesce around this one thing, because there was such disunity because of that whole original sin institution of slavery in this country. It's weird. The Pledge of Allegiance was associated with slavery, or afterwards at least, when people were so upset that they had to let go of their human property. Did they learn that? Did Wendy effing Rogers learn that? Yeah. She might have learned it, but she doesn't want anyone else to know it, because that pledge is something we're pushing on kids right now without telling them why they recited it at first and why they're reciting it now. It's about loyalty, and eventually it's gonna be illegal to say anything that's outside the realms of these Christian fascist leaders. Sounds a lot like North Korea, doesn't it? We're getting to that point, but we can't acknowledge that because, oh no, we're better than everyone else. At least until we act just like the people that we say are third world countries and have dictatorial leaders. A former president who actually praised dictatorial leaders, we just shove all that to the side. And the problem is children not reciting the pledge.
I mean, literally, there are states where, like, if you're a teacher and you just say, I'm gay, that's it. You get fired from your job. Like, rights, freedom. Honestly, again, I don't think that making them say the pledge or whatever communicates these values that they say they believe or whatever. But forcing them to, at pain of punishment, that does communicate something foundational about the way America actually works. It's just a little bit more meta than they might mean it to be.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.